All right, we're going to read the original classification authority desktop reference today. And this is a November 2019 one, so at the time of this recording, that's very recent. Looks like in the table of contents, we have a lot of determination things. So the determination of official government information, of eligibility for classification, of the impact on national security, determination of the appropriate classification level, and determination of classification duration. Step 6 will give us providing and communicating guidance for derivative classification. And again, this is from the original classification authority. The safety and security of the United States depend on the protection of sensitive information. Classification is one way to accomplish this protection. Original classification is the initial decision that particular information requires protection in the interest of national security and could be expected to cause damage if subjected to unauthorized disclosure. So the question is, what is original classification referring to? Now, CDSE packaged the standard process into 6 digestible steps in which the classifier must answer specific questions at each step and make considerations and decisions before classifying information. When you Google CDSE, you get Center for Development of Security Excellence. So you can use this desktop reference guide before classifying information. Just follow this 6-step decision process and you'll make quality classification decisions. OCAs, also called original classifiers, not ORCAs, include the President, Vice President, Secretary of Defense, the Secretaries of the Military Departments, and other officials within the Department of Defense who have been specifically delegated this authority in writing. So my question here is, who can be an original classifier? When classification is granted, OCAs are delegated classification authority specific to a level of classification and cumulative downwards. Maybe it's supposed to say this cumulates downwards. For example, an OCA appointed with top secret classification authority may classify information at the top secret, secret, and confidential levels. An OCA appointed with confidential classification authority may only classify information at that confidential level. And I like this paragraph because it gives us an idea of what can be classified: a system, plan, program, project, or mission. For example, it would not be appropriate for an air wing commander to classify information about a Navy undersea warfare program. Gotta stay in your lane. So here's step 1. The OCA must determine if the information being considered for classification is official. Official in this context is defined as information owned by, produced by, or for, or under the control of the U.S. government. Without the government having some proprietary interest in the information, classification is not an option. If the information is not official, the process stops at step 1, as the information would not be eligible for classification. The government would have to acquire proprietary interest before information could be classified. So simple question, what does official mean? And if any of these 3 things apply, it can be considered official. Now, defining information as official is not always clear, and some information may fall within the criteria of the Patent Secrecy Act of 1952, and/or may require guidance from your government legal counsel. For additional information on secrecy of certain inventions and withholding of patents, you may refer to 35 United States Code 181. And so here we move to step 2, determining of eligibility for classification. If eligible, determine if the information is limited or prohibited from being classified. So part A says if the information under consideration for classification cannot be placed in one or more of the 8 categories, it cannot be classified. You have to be in at least one of these 8. And apparently these are identified by Executive Order 13526. The first category is military plans, weapon systems, or operations. The second category is about foreign government information. Number 3 is intelligence activities, including covert action, intelligence sources or methods, or cryptology. Category 4 is foreign relations or foreign activities of the U.S., including confidential sources. The next one is scientific, technological, or economic matters relating to national security. Then we have U.S. government programs for safeguarding nuclear materials or facilities. And now I think we are starting to overlap, like this really seems to apply to this, so why do we need that one? Maybe this is helping some database somewhere organize these security classifications into a neater package. I don't know, but the second to last one says vulnerabilities or capabilities of systems, installations, infrastructures, projects, plans, or protection services relating to national security. And our last one, development, production, or use of weapons of mass destruction. If you're in one of these 8, you're good to classify it. They then say you should determine if the information has not already been classified by another OCA. So that makes sense before you go over the last 4 steps here. And then determine that classification guidance is not already available in the form of security classification guides, plans, or other memorandums. Within the DoD, the majority of existing classification guidance is indexed and promulgated via the Defense Technical Information Center. So that's very interesting. And my question I came up with for it is, where is all the classified material indexed? The answer is here, and we can go... Well, I tried to go there, but it's taking a long time, so let's carry on. Part B is about the classification prohibitions and limitations. Once information has been determined eligible for classification, the OCA must determine if the information is limited or prohibited from being classified. In accordance with that executive order, information may not be classified, continue to be maintained as classified, or fail to be declassified in order to... This is if you want to conceal violations of law, inefficiency, or administrative error. That's kind of silly, but logical. You can't classify things to hide any of these problems or these types of errors. You also can't classify things to prevent embarrassment to a person, organization, or agency. The government should not be restraining competition, nor should they be preventing or delaying the release of information that does not require protection in the interest of national security. And that site was still loading even after I read all that, but when I clicked the first thing that popped up in search, it took me to a website that looks like the one we're trying to get to. And pretty much it just looks like a login portal. I guess we could click announcements to see what's being announced. And this is what I see. So back to our reading. Now, limitations to classifications include basic scientific research not clearly related to national security, information that has been declassified and released to the public under proper authority may be reclassified only when the information may be reasonably recoverable without bringing undue attention to the information. So what does that mean? That means most individual recipients or holders are known and can be contacted, and all forms of the information to be reclassified can be retrieved from them. Reclassification sounds like a difficult process with that in mind. But doing this also means that the information has been made available to the public via means such as U.S. government archives or reading rooms, and it can be or has been withdrawn from public access without significant media or public attention or notice. And so I asked this question, which is easily answerable based on the reading. But my follow-up question is, I wonder how often the government has to reclassify things. Now, the DoD component heads, other than the secretaries of the military departments, shall submit recommendations for classification of information under their jurisdiction to the Secretary of Defense through the Undersecretary of Defense. Recommendations for reclassification must include on a document-by-document basis a description of the information, all information necessary for the original classification decision in accordance with the executive order, including classification level of the information and declassification instructions to be applied. Then you need the when and how it was released to the public, an explanation as to why it should be reclassified. So include the applicable reason in accordance with the executive order and describe what damage could occur to national security. Also, describe what damage may have already occurred as a result of the release. Next, you'll need to submit the number of recipients and/or holders and how they'll be notified of the reclassification, then how the information will be recovered, and then whether the information is in the custody of the National Archives and Records Administration, and whether the archivist of the U.S. must be notified of the reclassification. So this sounds like a nightmare. But let's get back on topic a little bit more. Step 3 is about the determination of the impact on national security. This is another essential decision the OCA must make before they can say the information has been classified. You have to determine the potential for damage to national security if unauthorized release occurs. If it is determined that there is no potential for damage to national security, the information will not be classified. If there is a potential for damage to national security and the information is determined eligible for classification as defined in Step 2, then you can classify. While it is not required to prepare a written description of the potential for damage to national security before the information can be classified, the OCA must be able to defend the decision and identify or describe the potential damage if their decision is questioned or challenged. It is recommended that the OCA put this justification in writing at the time of the decision and is made so when another person assumes their OCA responsibilities, and that person will have proper information. Now, the OCA must also consider the impact of classification itself, how overclassification could potentially impede the operational effectiveness of entities that need the information to complete their mission, and the possibility of protection. If classification is applied or reapplied, there must be a reasonable possibility that the information can be protected from unauthorized disclosures. Okay, so how would we summarize Step 3 actually? I'll just say that as a direction right here, and I would summarize by saying, well, first you have to justify the impact on national security, and I really like this part down here. You have to justify the potential harm that the classification will have on operational effectiveness. Okay, so on to Step 4, the determination of appropriate classification level. They have to evaluate the impact of classification in order to identify the appropriate level. The OCA must determine how sensitive information is. The OCA must determine how sensitive the information is, what the potential damage to national security would be. I thought we did that on Step 3. And assign a classification level based on that determination. Okay, so Step 4 is connecting to Step 3. And that's funny, this is written in the guide, but the OCA must use reasoned judgment to consider the extent of potential damage. So just be reasonable. And so here are some nice bullet points about the different levels. I think a table would be best. So here's a simple 3x3 table. So we got top secret, secret, and confidential. So basically the next row is all about the damage. If it's going to cause grave damage, it's top secret. Serious damage, secret. And if there's going to be a reasonable expectation that there will be damage, then it's confidential. So we're almost to the end here, Step 5. After determining the level of classification, the OCA must determine the duration of classification. This involves reviewing the level of classification to determine downgrading requirements and declassification, where it is determined that information no longer requires classification. So downgrading is all about the OCA evaluating the information to determine if there is a specific date or event in the future where the potential for damage to national security diminishes to a point that will enable the classification level to be lowered. And if the sensitivity of the information changes, the OCA will need to assign a date or even when downgrading can take place. If it's determined that the sensitivity will not decrease or cannot make a determination on decreased sensitivity, then the OCA will proceed to determine the declassification instructions. So this will answer our question of what will happen if a declassification date cannot be determined. They just need to create these declassification instructions. Now it does say here you have to make declassification determinations for all classification decisions. And these bullet points will provide us the guideline for that. If the OCA can determine a date within 10 years where the potential for damage from compromise is no longer a concern to national security, then that date is assigned as the declassification date. Okay, that was really straightforward. Now, if the OCA cannot determine a date but can identify an event that is expected to occur within the next 10 years where the potential for damage from compromise is no longer a concern to national security, then the event is assigned as the declassification instruction. Okay, so that seems like our real answer right here. When you can't find a date, you need an event. Now, if a date or event can't be determined within 10 years, then they're supposed to go up to 25 years. There's a human intelligence exception right here, HI instead of AI, right? This is called the 50X1-Hume exception. Or exemption, sorry. And it sounds like what this basically means is the future OCAs who have the designation of this classification level, they will be able to determine that. Next up is a weapons of mass destruction exemption. There you go right there with the WMD. And it sounds like here we'll have no date of declassification because you don't want to declassify information that's clearly demonstrating the development, production, or use of weapons of mass destruction. Our last one in step 5 is about guides containing RD or FRD topics. They must be coordinated with the Department of Energy, and note also that RD and FRD are never automatically declassified, and such information must not include declassification instructions. So on to our very last one here, the step 6. It's all about providing and communicating guidance for derivative classification. There are 2 methods for communicating the decision: the security classification guides and the properly marked source documents. The preferred method for communicating classification decisions is to communicate it through a security classification guide. Once the decision is communicated, and the decisions will be used by others who must work with the information to make proper derivative classification decisions and assure the information is properly protected from unauthorized disclosures. It is vital that OCAs communicate their decisions effectively. And so that's the end of this desktop reference. For our final question here, I asked, what does derivative classification involve? And so then after answering that, I hope you feel a lot more confident about how things are classified in the American federal government.